Order, order. Martin Wrigley to move the motion.
It's very topical to be talking about flooding. In Devon, it's been raining for about a year, it feels. In fact, it probably has been raining since the beginning of the year. And we are seeing every day more and more floods and more problems with water. SuDs are an area that most people will probably have never heard of. And in fact, when I first started my career in local government, I had no idea what people were talking about. First came to my attention really when I was knocking on doors in a local new estate in Newton Abbot in Hill Park. And the chap was saying they've spent all this money building these fantastic flood prevention channels, and there's a nice sort of set of attenuation ponds with steps down through it and all the rest. And it's falling apart because there are trees growing through it, because nobody's maintaining it, nobody's looking after it. It falls into the grounds maintenance contracts, and they send somebody out with a lawnmower to look after a complicated engineered set of flood prevention. This is not only in that one estate on Hill Park. This is common across many estates. In my hometown of Dawlish, we have a Redrow estate where the swale is currently filling up with trees. This is particularly important because this area is in an area of, it's a critical drainage area allocated by the Environment Agency. All of the water coming from the hills comes down into a single stream, Shutterton Brook, that at high tide is tide locked. So there is nowhere for it to go. So it is really important that in this place, the attenuation ponds do their job, which is to reduce the rate of water flowing off what used to be green fields. Now, planning permission is always granted on the basis that no more water comes off the hard surfaces, no faster than it would do off green fields, but it doesn't actually say where it has to go or what has to be done with it. And planners for years have been putting the need for drainage systems which take the form of bunds or ditches or all sorts of different things, including swales and attenuation ponds. And they've been putting them into the planning applications for developers who then spend a lot of time and money doing it. I have one other development where they're objecting because part of their site is being used to build the SuDs for an adjoining site. Now that shouldn't normally be a problem, but their site is finished. They're paying maintenance fees. The adjoining site is not yet finished and is building SuDs in a space that they are paying to have maintained. So they're up in arms, but even then the maintenance would not actually be looking after the SuDs, it would just be cutting the grass on this bank that's being used to access the SuDs. The problem is who maintains it. I was talking to Redrow saying, how are these SuDs going to be maintained on your site in Dawlish? And they said, there's a maintenance plan for all of these. And they're right, there probably is, for the pumps, for the tanks, for those bits that are hard engineering. And those might be done by the maintenance company, but they might not. Residents are unaware of the need for the maintenance of SuDs. They're unaware of what maintenance companies often do. So again, I can see very quickly this whole setup is going to fall into disrepair. And who will be there to pick up the pieces? The developer will have gone a long time ago. The residents have already paid for this because this is absorbed into the cost of building the site, the cost of buying their homes in the first place. So they are double paying for the maintenance of it. And then when it goes wrong, they will be the ones fitting the bill to actually put it right together again.
Give way.
I'd be delighted to.
I'm grateful. And I think what he has identified in his Newton Abbot constituency is a situation that exists all over the country. DEFRA wrote a report in July 2025 called National Standards for Sustainable Drainage Systems, and it talked about a national shortage of skilled professionals to maintain SuDs over their lifetime, as well as designing and inspecting them. Does he share my view that we need to have more professionals who are skilled in this area working at local authority level?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and absolutely do agree with him. And I will go on later to quote the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Managers, the new civil engineer, and indeed a body that I have only recently discovered, which is the Association of SuDs Authorities, which I didn't even know existed, but there we go. We have one more estate in Kingstainton, where I was recently called. They were complaining. A lovely circular area. They've got a circle of houses at the end of a cul-de-sac. Nice place. It's built on an old clay mine, so there are problems with the fact that it's on a fairly difficult site. But it's a lovely situation, except that this area, this circular area, which has a children's playground in the middle, is always completely and utterly sodden. It never dries out. The areas around it dry out, but this particular bit doesn't. And they've worked out that it's because the SuDs has not been built properly and the pipes have not been connected. The local planning authority says it looks fine on the plans, and from what we've seen, it's okay. The builders are not, well, they're doing an investigation for me because I've been jumping up and down and shouting, but this should not be something that the MP has to get involved in to actually get right so that areas have proper draining. This area is also critical in drainage. It's literally not far above sea level. We have massive floods in the roads outside, which are indeed ongoing. And the last thing we want is the water from this estate coming in and making all of that worse. As my honourable friend says, this is not just a problem in my Newton Abbot constituency. It's not just a problem with one or two estates. This is endemic. We've seen articles in the New Civil Engineer saying we desperately need a statutory obligation to look after SuDs. The Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Managers say exactly the same thing. A solution to this problem of how SuDs are maintained, how they are inspected, how they are handed over, indeed adopted, when the building site is finished, like the roads or the drains would be. This is wanted by the residents. It's wanted by the developers because they put a lot of time and effort into building these things and they see them just going to rack and ruin. It's wanted by the local authorities. It's wanted by the water companies and it's wanted by the environmental agency. The existence of a piece of legislation that would automatically do this was brought to my attention when, as a county councillor, I sat on the South West Regional Flood and Coastal Committee. Yes, I get all the good jobs. And this is about how we do flood defences in the southwest. Coming from Dawlish, this is particularly close to my heart, as you can possibly imagine, given the railway line. It's absolutely needed to have a statutory obligation to put SuDs in, a statutory means of certifying that those SuDs have been built to a level that will work, and a statutory responsibility to maintain them. Now, happily, there is a bill. That bill is the Flood and Water Management Act of 2010, so nearly 16 years ago, if not 16 years ago, which has a Schedule 3 within it. The only flaw with that schedule is that there was no instigation date specified within it, and it's down to the Minister to say when that is to be done. The previous government, prior to the general election, were in the process of actually having a plan to make this happen. And there were big announcements, big expectations. Again, it's all written up in the New Civil Engineer, fascinating monthly read, about how they were anticipating great things in 2024 and that we might see the implementation of Schedule 3 in 24 or 25. But of course, we know what happened. The general election came along. Now, in July last year, we had new standards for sustainable drainage. Very good. The government has issued a new set of standards, and these are a big improvement. It talks about 7 principles. It talks about how to make sure you are reusing water, and there's a lot of good work in this. However, there is one thing which is missing. This regulation talks about, you could ask your local water company to adopt these drainage solutions. Well, you could, but there's absolutely no reason why any water company would want to do so. because there is no way that it fits into their business model. Most of these things run off natural rainwater into streams and rivers, and they're just not interested. They're finding it hard enough to actually maintain their existing structures of foul sewage processing. South West Water recently had 3 pumping stations break down in the middle of the rain in Kenton and Starcross in my constituency, and they were flooding people with sewage. I'd much rather they looked after that than looked after SuDs. We have in place experts in flooding in district and county councils, and soon to be the unitary councils that will replace them, that have been involved in putting these together, that are pushing for these to happen, that are responsible for flooding, and they have a real interest in doing it. So let's go back to the solution, rather than, as suggested in the government's guidance last year, of actually having Schedule 3 enacted and actually getting SuDs certified and adopted by local authorities. Now, I can see the government will say, well, we can't do that because it's going to cost money. Yes, there will be an extra burden on local authorities that will need to be compensated. However, I put it to the government that since they are backing things like flood re, this is actually a preventative measure, and it costs a lot less to have the SuDs and the drains built properly, rather than the government being asked for money to actually restore properties once they have been flooded. Again, in Kenton, it's a village just by Powderham Castle within my constituency. The castle isn't, but the village is in my constituency. It flooded because a drain got blocked. And that flood ripped through the local primary school. It ripped through half a dozen houses, which are still empty and still being restored. And that primary school is now being replaced. Flood prevention is much cheaper than recovery from floods. So I urge the Minister to think about this as a necessary preventative measure. Too much in the last 60 years we have seen maintenance as the first thing that people cut from their budgets. And preventative maintenance is so important to keeping things working. If our drains were unblocked, if our small potholes were fixed, if our flooding systems actually worked, we would not be in some of the situations we are now. So this is a great opportunity for the government to show a desire to increase early intervention to make things better for residents.
On the point about early intervention,
Of course.
Richard Ford.
I'm grateful, and I should add that I'm really grateful for him securing this debate today. He talks about maintenance, but also design is really crucial as well. Margaret Leopard, who is from Seaton, has set up the Seaton Flood Working Group, and she points out that sometimes developers use outdated data sets when they are designing the drainage systems. And she says that rainfall data needs to be used in the 2026 data set rather than 2013 data set, which is what Baker Estates in Seaton has been using. Would he share that view?
Martin Wrigley.
I would entirely. Another reason why it's vital that it is the local authorities who are the flood management, the flood responsible authorities, are actually involved in certifying these SuDs as they are built and therefore taking them on afterwards. Let me quote from the Chartered Institute of Water Environmental Managers. Despite promises to enforce mandatory adoption of sustainable drainage schemes by 2024 through Schedule 3, regulations remain stalled, raising concerns among environmental groups and industry stakeholders about the government's commitment to sustainable water management. The time is now, and the Minister has it within her power, even if it's not necessarily exactly her department, to push forward through SI or whatever is required, the enactment of Schedule 3 of the Water Act of 2010. And I urge the Minister to take this on board as a real positive thing at a minuscule cost to the government that will make massive difference to people's lives going forward. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered sustainable drainage systems. I call Lib Dem spokesperson Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Ms Barker. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair today. And I'd firstly like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Newton Abbott, on his, for securing this debate and for his really excellent and knowledgeable speech. And I'd like to also just point to my honourable friend for Honiton and Sidmouth's point on his intervention regarding the really important point that he made around developers using those up-to-date data sets. And Ms Barker, in Somerset, the need to manage water is essential. My constituency of Glastonbury and Somerton is frequently impacted by extreme weather, flooding in the winter and droughts in the summer. The low-lying land of the Somerset levels and local river catchments can become overwhelmed quickly when heavy and prolonged rain sets in, or when hit by a flash flood, as we did back in May 2023. Ms Barker, the Somerset Rivers Authority was established in 2015 as a partnership of local stakeholders, and it's now knowledgeably chaired by the Liberal Democrat councillor Mike Stanton. Its overarching purpose is to reduce the risks and impacts of flooding across Somerset. The SRA was formed after those devastating floods in 2013-14, which was the wettest winter for over 250 years. Around 150 square kilometres of the Somerset levels was submerged for weeks and weeks. 165 homes were flooded, 7,000 businesses affected, and 81 roads closed across the area. But the cost to Somerset was in the region of £147.5 million. But once again, my constituents this winter are dealing with the devastating impact of flooding. Last week, Storm Chandra saw 50 millimetres of intense rainfall across large parts of Somerset in a really short period. It exacerbated the already saturated ground, and as a result, Somerset Council declared a major incident last Tuesday as 50 homes across the county fell victim to floodwater. Ms Barker, at this point, I'd like to pay tribute to everyone who's been part of the emergency effort to support communities across Somerset, whether that's staff members from the Somerset Council, the SRA, the Environment Agency, the emergency services and other partners, or members of affected communities who have opened their homes to displaced residents or those at risk of displacement, those that have been out with sandbags in their 4x4s making hot drinks for people who are cold and wet, or in my case last Saturday, Ms Barker, sweeping up car parks as floodwaters receded. Their commitment to help in times of need are really very much appreciated. But sadly, this incident is not a one-off, and with the Environment Agency warning that river levels are expected to remain high for several weeks, with unsettled weather forecasts now for quite some time, and spring tides imminent, high spring tides imminent, the risk of further flooding in Somerset remains. And with increasingly unpredictable, intense and changing patterns of rainfall, it is essential now that local communities are given the resources they need to prepare long-term, bespoke extreme weather resilience plans. Residents must feel confident that their homes will be safe from severe damage by flood water, and they must be better prepared to cope with flooding when it happens. Sustainable drainage systems have an important role to play in this, but there must be proper measures in place to bring sustainable drainage provisions into force, and they must also be properly maintained. As my honourable friend argued, the government should implement Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act to require sustainable drainage systems in all new developments. Ms Barker, well-designed sustainable drainage systems contribute to climate change resilience, they provide habitats for nature, they boost biodiversity and build flood preparedness. But the current lack of clarity has contributed to widespread problems on new estates, particularly where SuDs fall under the control of private estate management companies. Often homeowners can be left paying for poorly maintained systems with no public accountability, and there are cases where SuDs are simply left unmanaged, and it's no surprise when inevitably they fail. So if the government are committed to building the homes that people need, they must also ensure that new developments provide suitable flood mitigation measures, including SuDs that properly manage excess rainfall. Now, since 2020, Somerset Council has carried out over 100 formal inspections of SuDs on housing developments. While most are found to be inadequate, maintenance issues are often highlighted. Now, in Somerton, there are examples of this where it has not happened. During the 2013-14 flood, Somerton was badly hit and flooded between Farm Drive and Recreation Field. Defects were found in the drainage provided by the developers, while the attenuation pond that had not been maintained appropriately overtopped. Retention tanks were later installed, but these were paid for by the taxpayer, not the developer, as I feel they should have been. And yet again, last week, this very area has once again experienced heavy flooding. Now, Sue and Amber told me, they live locally in Somerton, that they'd lost 3 days' worth of income due to the recent floods because they simply couldn't get through the floodwater. And they're also concerned about a planning proposal on Rixey Lane that could make the situation much, much worse. Now, they're not alone. Many people fear that the development will create increased surface runoff, leading to flooding downstream. Now, these anxieties are sadly not restricted to Somerton, because residents in Street are fearing the developer of a planned additional 280 homes hasn't taken the precautions necessary to prevent potentially catastrophic flooding of their properties. Residents told me that their key concerns surround the proposed surface water drainage for the site, because the developer plans on discharging water into 2 attenuation ponds. And this, along with the volume of the Portway stream, will then flow into an existing northern watercourse. However, they believe that the watercourse will not be properly maintained as it falls outside of the developer's remit. Mrs. Barker, current national guidelines are designed to prevent new developments worsening flooding downstream, but existing drainage guidance is based on assumptions that do not always hold true in Somerset. In very flat areas like the Levels and Moors, water can linger for days, weeks or even months, rather than flowing quickly away. Across different subcatchments, many factors like soil type, infrastructure, rainfall patterns interact in complex ways that currently standards just simply don't address fully. This is why Somerset Council is asking the Somerset Rivers Authority to fund an ambitious study into how water really behaves across Somerset's catchment. The aim of this would be to build a better evidence base so that planners can update guidance and developers can design smarter drainage systems, and communities will face less flood risk. Mrs. Barker, I hope this study can influence the national conversation, but without action from the government setting mandatory standards for developers, residents' anxieties will continue to grow. Disappointingly, the government is consulting on deleting the rule that prevents planning permission being granted where the Environment Agency objects due to flood risk. But the Liberal Democrats are clear that this must not happen, and that the absolute need for new homes must be weighted against the very real flood risk. Water management sector is already frustrated that this government have yet to commit to implementing mandatory SuDs, and the recent Cunliffe review identified inconsistencies in the use of SuDs as one of the 4 main issues with the current wastewater and drainage regime. So while the updated standards published last June is a welcome step in the right direction, they are simply not suitable for legislation. So the Liberal Democrats believe a clear, enforceable national framework is required for SuDs that standardises design, guarantees long-term adoption, maintenance, and ensures someone is genuinely responsible when the systems fail. Anything less will continue to leave residents exposed to flooding unexpected charges and environmental harm. This is why we tabled an amendment to the Water Special Measures Act 2025 that would have required water companies to provide honest and accurate assessments of their infrastructure's capacity to meet the needs of proposed developments when consulted. So it is disappointing that this amendment was not supported by the government or the Conservatives. But I hope the government will review this, as it is essential to ensure water system capacity is better accounted for in future developments. And I would appreciate it if the Minister were able to provide me with an update on that today. Mrs Barker, the Welsh Government has implemented Schedule 3, and their post-implementation review has revealed the value and benefit of the legislation. While improvements may still be required, this is a necessary first step, and we must follow. The Minister has previously confirmed the Government is considering what action to take, but it is still deciding whether they will improve the planning-led system or commence Schedule 3. So I urge the Minister to listen to Liberal Democrat calls, and she is very welcome to take forward our ideas, because the current regime has not done enough to make at-risk communities more resilient to flooding, leaving residents frightened, anxious and desperately worried every time dark clouds roll in. Now, in Somerset, we know what it is like to live at the forefront of climate change, and that the county will always be at risk of flooding. But with the right planning, investment and collaborative working, the risk and impact of flooding can be mitigated so people feel safer in their homes. Mr Barker, once again, I would like to extend a visit to the Minister and any other Right Honourable and Honourable members to visit my constituency of Glastonbury and Somerton, to witness the terrible impact flooding has on communities. And it's really important to see this while the water levels remain high, because I'm certain that this would focus minds and give impetus, if any is needed, as to why we must implement Schedule 3 urgently. Thank you.
Opposition spokesperson, Afra Rundreth.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mrs Barker. I congratulate the member for Newton Abbot for securing this debate. He's spoken passionately about this issue, the impact of heavy rainfall and flooding in his constituency, and the consequences for residents when developments do not adequately address the need for sustainable drainage and for these SuDs to be maintained. The Honourable Member for Honiton and Sidmouth also, in his interventions, raised some important points, particularly around the need for more skilled professionals in this area. The previous government's plan for water, published in 2023, recognised sustainable drainage systems as an effective means of reducing surface water flooding and committed to their use in all new developments. The current government is continuing this approach through the publication of national standards for sustainable drainage systems. As I understand it, while the government is yet to make a final decision, it appears that it's pursuing a planning policy-based approach to SuDs rather than commencing Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act. Schedule 3 would require all developments to include SuDs for planning approval to be granted. If Schedule 3 is implemented, developers will not only be required to include SuDs in new developments, but will also be required to ensure that designs are approved before construction begins. As the government's national standards are non-statutory, the Minister will be aware that questions have been raised about enforceability and concern that developers may seek to identify methods to evade the guidance. Is the Minister therefore concerned that, however well-intentioned, the non-statutory guidance may not achieve its intended purpose? I note that there are also calls for clarity on multi-property developments being adopted by an appropriate authority without clarifying which authority that should be. Is this something her department is looking into or would be willing to clarify? I want to turn briefly to developments which have been built but have not yet been adopted. The Minister may be aware that research from the Home Builders Federation, published in October 2025, found that of the developments of 10 or more homes built in the last 3 years, 97% of new sewers and 98% of SuDs remain unadopted. The same research found significant inconsistencies across local authorities. As the Minister will know, local authorities are reluctant to adopt roads until sewers are formally adopted. And I want to briefly mention two examples from my own constituency of Chester South and Eddisbury that illustrate these issues all too clearly. Satan Camp, which is just outside the city of Chester, and the Witchwood Estate in Wimbury both have unadopted, incomplete infrastructure. Residents have been left in limbo, with developers moving on, the water company refusing to adopt the sewerage system until the developers complete the work, and the local authority refusing to adopt the roads until the sewers are formally adopted. Alongside this, there are frequent issues with the swales that are meant to provide sustainable drainage, yet are ineffective. So with this in mind, what assessment has the Minister made of the issue being a procedural one, and does she believe there is scope to make the adopting process more consistent to provide clarity for residents? The government has set a housing target to build 1.5 million homes in this Parliament, a target that, with their current performance, no one really believes that they can possibly achieve. The government's own figures show that in the first year in power, the number of new net additional dwellings and the number of new homes built both went down. So can the Minister provide assurances that the government will not abandon its approach to SuDs, recognising them as a continuing priority that will not be traded off for other land uses in pursuit of their top-down housing targets? And can I ask the Minister, when businesses are facing increased financial pressure and costs as a result of the government's disastrous economic policy, what assessment has she made of the effect of these policies on SuDs, which may add further costs to new homes? And on the topic of development, it would be remiss of me not to mention the role farming can play in water management and sustainable drainage. Nearly 300,000 homes have been built on prime farmland, with an extra 1,400 hectares used for renewable energy projects, despite more than enough previously developed brownfield land waiting for regeneration. Under the previous Conservative government, through the Countryside Stewardship Scheme and SFIs, farmers were encouraged to implement practices that would mitigate the risks and consequences of flooding. Can the Minister provide assurances that water management grants will be part of the SFI scheme when it finally reopens? Mrs Barker, internal drainage boards also do a fantastic job of managing water levels and reducing the risk from flooding within their district. Their work involves maintenance and improvement, and they currently play a significant part in advising on planning applications regarding SuDs. Can the Minister provide assurances that IDBs will continue to have a prominent role in the planning process? Furthermore, as the Shadow Minister, the member for Keighley and Ilkley, has called for, has the government considered the merits of bringing flexibility to the relationship between the Environment Agency, IDBs and land managers? The last government provided IDBs with £75 million in 2024 to modernise and upgrade resilience assets for farms and rural communities. Is the Minister working closely with her colleagues in the Cabinet Office to monitor the consequences of the recent storms and the related funding of IDBs? Madam Chair, as I conclude my remarks, I know that all of us here today and members from across the country will have constituents who are affected by flooding, and we know how damaging and disruptive it can be. It is therefore important that the government set out a clear approach as to whether SuDs are viewed as best practice or standard approach. Clarity is needed so the industry knows where it stands and our constituents can have confidence in the legislation and guidance that is provided to developers. Part of this will be ensuring a prominent role for local risk management authorities such as IDBs, so that the best possible sustainable approaches can be implemented to mitigate the risks and consequences of flooding. Thank you.
Minister Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mrs Barker. It is a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Newton Abbot for bringing forward this important debate. And can I say on a personal level how much I've enjoyed sitting through a debate where there's been so much love for previous Labour policy, Mrs Barker, because of course it was the Labour Party which in fact did the 2010 Act that both the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives seemed so very keen to enact. I would just gently say they did have a mere 14 years in which it could have been enacted. However, it falls back to this Labour government to 5 years for the Liberal Democrats. It falls to this Labour government to obviously tackle the issue of SuDs. But putting that to one side, and I did say this to the Honourable Lady earlier, my full sympathy and support to everybody who's been impacted by flooding. It's been horrific, especially for families and homes and businesses that are facing repeated flooding episodes. And I am taking away from Orwell's earlier today as to whether, how quickly I can come down and see that for myself, and I'll pick that up with her, because it's really, I think, really important. And there's been lots of incredibly important points raised throughout all of this. So just to sort of talk a little bit, there was a point made about why water companies wouldn't be interested, and in fact they are. And the reason why many of them are is because we call it, when it comes to water, the pre-pipe solutions. Because to explain it sort of most simply, is if you have an awful lot of surface water and that ends up in the sewage system, you end up with more storm overflow incidents, because the system becomes overloaded, so it spills out into the rivers, lakes and seas, and then you have pollution incidents. So there is sort of an incentive for the companies, for water companies, to be interested in this, because you hold the surface water away, you prevent some of the pollution. And there's some really good examples, admittedly in more urban areas, but great examples of this happening. So there's one in Mansfield where they've done a project, there's Living with Water, where you've got the local authority, the Environment Agency, and the council all working together on this. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, which is from the white paper looking at regional planning, is actually how you can bring together different interested parties into that same region to look at one of the ways of tackling pollution is actually to stop the system becoming overloaded. Yes, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I'm delighted she's talking about water companies splitting the surface water from the foul water. This is exactly what they're doing in the middle of Dawlish, where they are creating massive new tanks to enable that to happen. This is a programme that's been going on for about 2 years. Most of Dawlish has been dug up. The centre of Dawlish has been in disarray because of this programme. But throughout the last 10 years, South West Water have been talking about this separation of surface water and foul sewage and insisting it happens higher upstream. And that is fine and proper, and yes, absolutely they are agreed in that. What they're not interested in is what happens to that surface water off estates that are already separating it out. That's not a problem they're addressing. They already have big enough problems elsewhere to fix problems of the past. That is where the SuDs come in, and that's why they're not interested in those.
Yeah, happy to kind of go on to talk about SuDs, but as I say, just addressing sort of why there is a collective, if you like, self-interest in everybody getting involved in this, because it will help to reduce pollution. And that's why it was a key part of what we were talking about in the white paper. And it's also, speaking personally as someone who loves nature, this is also an opportunity to have increased nature in different areas. They don't have to be concrete tanks. They can be, somewhere that is quite beautiful. Now, we want to maximise the opportunities offered by better managing of rain as well, looking at where that lands. So it's estimated the average household roof collects 85,000 litres of rainwater every year. I mean, obviously, maybe a little more in the Chair's constituency, maybe a little less somewhere else, and a fair bit in Hull as well. But that's equivalent to an estimated 4 trillion litres annually across the UK, or 1.6 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. Therefore, thinking as well, not just about SuDs, not just about pre-pipe, but thinking about rainwater management. There's all different, things that we can do, and that's why we want to work together with other stakeholders, including water companies, environmental groups, local authorities, developers, to come up with how can we collectively achieve this ambition. So, on sustainable drainage, it's quite right to point out it's a 2010 Act which was never fully enacted by the coalition and then Conservative governments. And SuDs are vitally important for sustainable development. They do help reduce additional pressure on the sewage system by up to 87%. I am a huge fan. I've spoken quite often about my love of sustainable urban drainage. But they can also enable growth. A SuDs retrofit programme in London created the additional headroom for 116,000 new homes. And as has been mentioned since we came into government, our record on SuDs is in December 2024, we made changes to the National Planning Policy Framework to support increased delivery of SuDs. This now requires all developments to utilise SuDs where they could have drainage impacts. And these systems should be appropriate to the nature and scale of the development. quite obviously. And then again, in June 2025, the government introduced new national standards, making it clear that SuDs should be designed to cope with changing climate conditions. Because whenever we're doing anything now in this country, we need to have a mind on how our climate is changing and make sure that it's resilient for the future. As well as delivering wider water infrastructure benefits, so flood prevention, it can help with storm overflow reduction, offering reuse opportunities. But of course, there's more that we need to do. And as I say, some time has passed since 2010 was enacted. So it's important that we consider the most efficient and effective way of securing these objectives. And we think at the moment this could be through changes to planning policy and adoption and maintenance, which I'll come on to, rather than commencing Schedule 3. But with that in mind, we've been tightening national planning policy on this important issue. So we are consulting on a new national planning policy framework at present, which adds the requirement for sustainable drainage systems are designed in accordance with new national standards to provide a consistent basis for their design and implementation. Additionally, we are currently consulting on legislative and policy options to reduce the prevalence of unadopted estates and the injustices associated with them, including for SuDs. And on 18th of December last year, the government published 2 consultations, one on enhanced consumer protections for homeowners on privately managed estates, and another on reducing the prevalence of estate management arrangements. And we continue to collaborate with industry leaders and are supporting the development of a new rainwater management platform, which will provide, and that data was mentioned, digital tools to support the delivery of high-quality SuDs. Additionally, we're working with the industry body, CIRA, to better understand the challenges around property-level SuDs and rainwater harvesting. Subsequent guidance will support industry to deliver in line with our recently published national standards for SuDs and will be publicly available. And to ensure the longevity and the proper maintenance of SuDs, we are scoping options for maintenance funding mechanisms and the methodology for calculating maintenance costs. And will publish guidance later this year, which will support the delivery of SuDs in line with the new national standards. And then answer some of the questions on maintenance. We recognise the challenges relating to the adoption and maintenance of SuDs and how that can impact communities. So we're committed to ensuring they're well maintained. As I've mentioned, in June 25, we've issued the standards, and in support of this, we're currently conducting research into the funding of SuDs maintenance. So we're looking with industry and experts at different funding mechanisms, as well as the methodology for calculating maintenance cost. And when it comes to how can we ensure SuDs are provided and maintained as part of a new development, Section 106 agreements can be used to provide for the maintenance of SuDs over their lifetime, where this meets the statutory test, of course. We've revised the national planning framework. We're consulting on a new framework to require SuDs in accordance with the new national standards, and the consultation that sets out that SuDs should have maintenance arrangements in place to ensure acceptable standard of operation for the anticipated lifetime of the development, which is really important. It's not just about when it's built, but the lifetime of the development, building on the current requirement for these to be in place for major development proposals. And that consultation is open until the 10th of March, so I encourage members and interested people to respond to that consultation. It was mentioned about specialists as well, making sure that we have the people we need. And we absolutely need the skilled planners, including specialists in areas like ecology or infrastructure. And they're absolutely essential to making sure that we have a proactive planning services. And we know that local planning authorities continue to face challenges in recruiting and retaining staff. However, ultimately, of course, it is up to local authorities who they employ and how they do that. But nevertheless, given these pressures are so widespread, the government is significantly expanding support through the Planning Capacity and Capability Programme, including growing the graduate and mid-career pipeline, strengthening specialist training through the Planning Advisory Service, and launching a new Planning Careers Hub to open additional routes into the profession. So we're trying to grow our own planners for the future. And we're looking at whether an increase to local authority funding for SuDs could be required. So I hope all of that helps to illustrate that this government have not waited 14 years to deliver what the previous government were attempting to do, Madam Chair. This government is getting on with doing it now through changes to the planning framework, through making sure we have the talent we need, through innovation, through working with others to finding new ways to deliver the protection that our country needs. And we are strongly committed to improving the implementation of SuDs. The actions I've outlined today are just the beginning, and I look forward to working with all honourable members in this room towards that goal.
I call Martin Wrigley to wind up.
Thank you, Mrs Barker. If I neglected to say at the beginning, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I thank everybody for their contributions today. I think my honourable colleague, my honourable friend from Glastonbury and Somerton accurately pointed out that SuDs, whilst solving local problems, need to be balanced in the wider area as well. So this is not something that you can fix on a site-by-site basis. It's not something that you can actually manage on a site-by-site basis, and requires an overall view from someone like the local authority. I also thank her for bringing up the the fact that Wales has implemented Schedule 3 and is working with it and has lessons. And I note the Minister, whilst I'm sure has read and seen that, I draw those to the Minister's attention to see a way that can make this work. And I thank the member for Chester South and Edinburgh for her support in the need for the maintenance of SuDs and showing that this is not just the West Country, but this is a national issue everywhere. The Association of SuDs Authorities supports the enaction of Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act to create SuDs approvals bodies. Of course, they also go on to say they need the appropriate funding to do that. Whichever mechanism is chosen to provide inspection, and I quote from them, maintenance and enforcement of surface water drainage systems, our local government members stand ready to ensure SuDs are considered the primary solution for dealing with surface water issues in a multi-beneficial way. By learning from the experience of the Welsh Government SAB implementation in 2019, and through consistent delivery of policy and process, we support the role of SuDs in delivering greener, safer, high-quality communities. Now, all of that and everything the Minister's talked about is great. And I really appreciate the amount of work the Minister is putting in. There's a lot of good things in what have been described. And the bill is good. You know, it's a great bill. I like to call out things that have been delivered that are good, no matter what colour the party that delivered them. So I'm not here to bash colour against colour. I'm here to get results for local residents. But water requires a holistic solution. In the year 2000, we had, again, in Dawlish Warren, in that same place that was tide-locked, we had floods that were 6 foot deep. People were being evacuated from their park homes by helicopter because of upstream problems where too much water was released into Shutterton Brook. It was Devon County Council that put in the flood mitigation schemes to actually prevent that happening, and that has now been prevented. However, all of that work will be for nothing if the 2,000 houses that are being built in that critical drainage area right now do not have SuDs that are certified and adopted and maintained in the long term. And that flooding will return. The local authorities are thinking they might need pumps to actually empty the river into the estuary when the tide-locked exit, when the tide is in. That is not a good situation. That is not sustainable. We need to ensure that these SuDs upstream are done. South West Water are not in a position to take this on. My work in the South West Regional Flood and Coastal Committee shows that there is, amongst all of the people working in the area, a universal feeling that we need Schedule 3. I thank the Minister for her attention and for her words today, but would ask her to look again at Schedule 3. Thank you.